Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to Mallory's Weird World Adventures, the podcast. I'm your host, Mallory, and I'm here to show you just how weird this world of ours really is. I'm excited today to have Brian Dunning here with me. Brian created Skeptoid Media, and he is a profound member of the skeptic community. So I'm going to give a little
Wow.
intro to that, and we'll be on the way. So I've always been interested in weird and interesting places, mythology, folklore, and belief systems. I began studying anthropology with a specialization in mythology, folklore, and the occult. And the more I've kind of dived into these topics as a journalist, the more I see sometimes a lack of rigor in there being any stories or evidence in those paranormal or belief claims. The stories that have made me the most interested are always of like weird history and how they relate to or cause mythological tales. For instance, we found out if like I think just last year that Vlad Tepes may have had hemolacria, which means that he may have cried bloody tears, which could lead to the mythology behind Dracula. So, because of this, I found the importance of finding people with credentials that conduct rigorous investigations and studies that lead to some real truths. So, the actual studies and knowledge have become much more important to me. That, along with my partner being involved in that world, has gotten me very interested in scientific skepticism. And the more I've learned about this, the more I've applied it to all the investigations and work that I have done. And I think I'm gaining something very valuable there behind it. And it makes the places I visit even more interesting and definitely not less so. So, on that note, as I've gotten more into it, I attended CSICon, and that's where I met Brian Denning this year. And after we talked some, I knew I had to bring him here on the Weird World Adventures podcast to discuss skepticism.
Yay.
So, Brian, could you please introduce yourself and then talk a little bit about, I guess, what got you into scientific skepticism?
Yeah. So I started doing my podcast back in 2006, and there was literally 2,000 podcasts that existed in the world. And
Wow.
now there's something like 5.5 million. So it was, at the time, it was easy to be a big fish in a small pond. So I probably wouldn't be here today if I hadn't had that advantage. But I started doing the podcast, and people started listening, and people started emailing me feedback and suggestions for episodes, and oh, you should do this and you should do that. So here I am 18 years later, doing the same thing, only about halfway along that journey, we became an educational nonprofit, and now we've got a staff and we do documentary films and other projects and all kinds of fun stuff. Um, but it's funny hearing you talk about the things that you're interested in that got you into it, because I would say that that is the same story for every science writer. I basically identify as a science writer
Hmm.
when people ask me what I do for a living. And I grew up with all of the books about ghosts and Bigfoot and UFOs. I believed every word in every one of those books. I couldn't believe that the people around me didn't seem to care about these things. We go camping in the woods. I couldn't believe my dad and everyone else, they weren't terrified of these Bigfoots that were obviously all around us. And that's the same story everyone who writes about science has, that they got them started and they just wanted to know what's really going on with these weird, mysterious things. You can watch TV and they'll tell you, "Hey, this UFO case, it was an alien visitation." Now, that's a simple, satisfying explanation, and most people are satisfied with that. They go, "Wow, aliens visit the Earth. That's cool." But they don't seem to have any curiosity to want to know what's really going on. What's the actual rest of the story? And that's what I always wanted to know. All of those books that I read when I was a kid, I always wanted to know what's really going on with that. And so here I am doing that for a living, which is incredibly bizarre and incredibly amazing, and incredibly fortunate. But yeah, there you go. That's it in a nutshell.
It's amazing. It's exactly me as well. I mean, I definitely started with that want to believe, but when you're curious enough, you want to know
Yeah.
more and
Yeah.
you want the science behind it, definitely. And I guess, so you've done tons of investigations on this. What's, I guess, the strangest or at least maybe your favorite investigation that you've conducted?
I want to say that, I mean, I've done 970 something episodes now,
Wow.
and all different urban legends. So anything you can think of. And I've come to find that in general, the ones I'm most interested in are the historical mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that rise to the very top that I love the most are the ones where the story centered around a particular person.
Mm-hmm.
It was either someone who invented the legend, it was either someone that the legend was about, uh, and that person's life has almost always been really terribly fictionalized,
Mm-hmm.
and really badly misrepresented because everyone today, they want to talk about the ghost story version of it or the paranormal version of it as if that's the true story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never the true story. Like, I mean, I'll throw out three quick examples. Amelia Earhart.
Mm-hmm.
She was this extraordinary role model, and her legacy has been graffitied with all of these fake stories about where she crashed and did she lived on this island and she got kidnapped by the Japanese and these things that are absolutely not true. And yet, whenever she's on TV, that's what they promote. That's the only story they go with.
Mm-hmm.
Another example I'll give is Roger Patterson, the guy who faked the famous Bigfoot film, the Bigfoot going across the. Am I wearing the Bigfoot shirt? No, I'm not. We,
Mm-hmm.
we sell a Bigfoot shirt. Um, and his story is very fascinating. Bigfoot believers, they simply say it's a real video. That's it. Will not hear any information to the contrary. The skeptics say it was a guy in a suit. That's it. That's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I really enjoy finding out is why he made it and what were the circumstances leading up to it. And that is a whole fascinating story. And he was a really interesting guy. He was a massive jerk, first of all, but he was a really interesting guy. And the third example I will give is Sarah Winchester of the Winchester Mystery House in California. We saw the video. Coleman Watts made a great video
Yes.
about that. When I first started when I was a kid, I went to the Winchester Mystery House, and they say, this is the widow of, Mr. Winchester of Winchester Rifles. And her psychic told her to build this house and never stop building it, or the ghosts of all the people killed by Winchester Rifles are going to get her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she held seances every night and continued construction of this enormous house that just goes on and on and on forever. And that every single word of that is false. And it turns out that she was this amazing philanthropist in early California in the days when women just didn't do that. And she was a very successful business person in the days when women just didn't do that. She had properties all over the Bay Area, and the only reason she kept building this big weird house was number one, it was kind of a fun hobby for her. She didn't spend that much time there. But number two, these were very depressed economic times, and she wanted to keep people employed. So
Mm-hmm.
here's this terrific story of this woman who was, um, a leader in so many ways, and you never hear that. You just hear the crap that people graffiti all over her true story. So that's a long-winded answer to what kind of stories do I like the best. It's the ones where there are fascinating people at the core of it.
Mm-hmm. Sarah Winchester, it's funny, I also featured the Winchester Mystery House. And it's a perfect example of just anthropologically, it's usually
Mm.
older women that don't fit into society that kind of get pushed out as witches. They're the people that, go on the witch trials. And throughout history, that kind of stereotype has always been persecuted or shunned or pushed away because they don't always fit in. And she's kind of the perfect ideal of someone who didn't fit into that, modern day society, and therefore she was shunned. And it fits that, anthropological trend.
Yeah. I guess she was not very sociable. She didn't go out much. She didn't go to the big parties,
Mm-hmm.
and she was very wealthy, and she was kind of resented for all of those things. And people made up stories about her. And I mean, the stories got started during her lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Totally undeserved.
So why do you think it's so important to have that critical, skeptical eye and mindset in everything you do?
It's when you know what's real
Mm-hmm.
compared to what's false, you're able to make your life decisions based on good information rather than on bad information. I mean, that's basically it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And that has tendrils that extend into all facets of your life. And when you start to believe in one weird thing, it kind of puts you in the mindset of enjoying believing in weird things.
Hmm.
And it's more likely to spread and you accept more and more weird things. And you can make all kinds of terrible life decisions. You can get conned. You can make bad business decisions. You can make very bad medical decisions. You can
Hmm.
make bad nutrition and eating decisions when you believe misinformation. And all of those are things that we see happening to people all around us every day.
Hmm.
Having a skeptical mindset, which, I mean, to sum it up in a nutshell, is to demand a standard of evidence for the things that you believe in.
Hmm.
That's the best way to protect yourself from that.
Hmm.
And it's something that most people don't have any interest in doing.
Hmm.
Uh, what was I reading the other day? There was some article about the belief in aliens visiting the Earth right now.
Hmm.
And it's something like 60% of Americans now, if you ask them, do aliens visit the Earth? They say, yeah, yeah, they do. I saw something about that on TV. And that's all the thought they put into it. It doesn't impact their daily life, and so they don't care about it. But they
Hmm.
just heard about this, and so they believe something that's incredibly false. And they've just shown that they are so susceptible. Well, I shouldn't say they, we. They've shown
Hmm.
that we are all so susceptible to believing in things that aren't real just because it comes from a source we trust, like the
Hmm.
television or people we know or podcasts we listen to, me and
Hmm.
you.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's such an easy trap to fall into.
definitely. And I feel like there's that child in everyone that wants to just believe in magic and wants to kind of stay
Mm.
ignorant, but it's such a harmful place to be.
Yeah, I mean, here's an example of that, and I'll talk about my own mom.
Hmm.
Um, my sister died when she was 31, and my mom has never recovered from that.
Hmm.
And she watches everything about the ghost hunting TV shows that she can
Hmm.
possibly find and consume because she has this deep psychological need now to think that people can continue on after death.
Hmm.
And so it's taken over her life, basically.
Hmm. So she can't live her own life because she's stuck in that mindset.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's a great example of why you shouldn't just believe things that you want to believe.
Hmm.
And a great place to start is to understand that we all believe things that are false. I certainly
Hmm.
do. I don't know what they are. If I did, I would correct them, but I do believe things that are false. We all do.
Hmm.
And if you can accept that, if you can really accept that fact, that's the best place of all to start. Say, well, gee, how can I start cleaning house a little bit? And
Right.
scientific skepticism, demanding a standard of evidence, that's a great way to do it.
I guess what are some positives you've seen from people coming into a situation with a skeptical mindset?
I had This was early in my podcasting career, and it was still one of the most profound things that happened. Is I got an email from someone who I think his brother um, had ALS
Hmm.
and was in the wheelchair already and had lost most of his motor function, but still had enough intellect and enough motility that he could search the internet and buy scam products
Hmm.
because there are scam products for every illness. And this guy was ruining his family's finances, paying huge amounts of money for these fake treatments that had no possible hope of improving his situation.
Hmm.
And the family was letting him do it because,
Hmm.
well, he needs that. He needs that hope. And when this guy told me the story, um, I thought and I thought and I thought and I said, no, that's that doesn't make any sense. Being the one who's sick doesn't give you the right to ruin your family's finances
Hmm.
or to pass fake information along with them. Um, I titled that episode Despicable Vulture Scumbags, and it was about the people selling these
Right.
scams.
Yeah.
And Apple, like, they censored that. They censored that episode title. I
Oh
guess
my
scumbag
God.
was the offending word. Um, And so I ran that episode and kind of made that point that
Hmm.
just because you're sick doesn't mean you have the right to hurt your relatives, hurt your loved ones by seeing them, by making them watch you hurt
Hmm.
yourself and
Right.
deny real treatment in favor of these scams.
Hmm.
And it was probably a couple of years later that I heard back from the guy, and he said, I just want to know that every word you said in that episode, it impacted everyone in my family. And my brother did stop buying all of those treatments almost right away. And he died last month. I just wanted to let you know and that you made a huge difference in this guy's life. And holy crap, that was something else. That was
Wow.
one of the early days when I realized, oh, you can have a real impact in the world just doing a podcast.
Hmm.
And I have, and that's amazing. And
Yeah. It's a
I
very
couldn't be,
good point to, when you have the platform, what you put out there is so important and the messages that you give to people because it does leave a footprint.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, you probably have the same experience when you listen to other podcasts, particularly some of the really, really popular podcasts
Hmm.
that will that present themselves as science or educational. And no, it's two guys reading Wikipedia and two guys repeating what they heard on Ancient Aliens last night.
Hmm.
And as often as not, I hear terrible information, even from some of the NPR podcasts that are
Hmm.
supposed to be these great science podcasts. Nope, you're promoting some fringe science claim that was disproven 10 years ago, and you've got as your guest the crackpot who developed that, and you're promoting it as if it's some real thing.
Hmm.
I'm very, very frustrated and very upset when I see that happen
Hmm.
because they're just being part of the problem.
Right. And I know it's like personally for me, I think we've talked about this a little bit with my background. You're taught in anthropology to honor people's belief systems, to never step in, to just be an observer, to never give your opinion or voice, and to just kind of record. And I feel like that's kind of derailed me sometimes in the wrong direction because, as you've brought up, belief systems can be harmful. And so
Yeah.
I've been kind of trying to slowly delve down the line of when do they become harmful? And, when do you step in? Because it's so different than what I was taught when I was, going through my training and education. And it's been an interesting course of discovery, I guess, to find that. And when we've talked, you said, it's always harmful. And I like your viewpoints on that because it has made me question and continue to kind of go down that point of self-discovery for myself.
People will often ask me things like, well, hey, my grandma believes her poodle is psychic. And what's the harm in that? It gives my grandma comfort to think that.
Hmm.
Well, there's no harm in that. But
Hmm.
it shows that your grandma's thought process is one that's going to lead her into getting scammed the next time she gets one of these phone calls,
Hmm.
or next time someone tries to tell her to treat her cancer with seaweed or something.
Right.
It's not a good road for your grandma to be starting down.
Hmm.
Yes, the poodle psychic, that's wonderful. Love to hear it. I don't want to hear that your grandma died because she didn't get radiation therapy for her cancer because
Hmm.
someone told her it was, part of the deep state's plan to murder everyone.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of harm out there.
Hmm. And I guess too, Michael's seen a lot of that firsthand too, because as a physician,
Oh
he's
yeah,
seen people who will just make the wrong choices because they believe the wrong things.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. That's all. I mean, obviously the place where it's very most harmful. Um, there's not a lot of that. Most of the medical misinformation that's out there is relatively harmless.
Hmm.
But I mean, we saw with the pandemic that all of a sudden it's don't get vaccines and
Hmm.
take hydroxychloroquine and what's the other stuff? The stuff they call horse paste, which is actually a
Yes.
perfectly regular antimicrobial. In fact, we have horses. We've got tubes of that stuff in our barn. So, um, but yeah, so we saw a dramatic example of how medical information, misinformation, can easily become rise to the surface.
Hmm. It's very dangerous. I guess too, I should ask, so in your studies, your investigations, I know we kind of asked about what some of your favorite stories were, but Are there any strange things you've seen firsthand or just peculiar cases that stood out to you?
Well, okay. So I want to say that that's one of the most frequently asked
Okay.
questions that I get. And what people are really asking, in my experience, and I'd love to hear your feedback on that,
Hmm.
is they're really asking, what are the stories you looked into where the paranormal explanation did turn out to be the true one?
Not, I guess for me, it's more like I'm down for the adventure and I love the weird stuff. So, like, have you
Yeah.
ever just had any weird experiences where you're just like, what just
Well,
happened? Like, paranormal or
oh,
not,
sure.
right? Like, just what is
Yeah.
happening?
I mean,
Yeah.
I was raised in a family that believed in ghosts, and
Hmm.
I thought I saw ghosts a number of times um,
Hmm.
when I was a kid growing up. And I've seen a number of UFOs, all of
Hmm.
which, unfortunately, I did identify shortly thereafter. But
Hmm.
during those few minutes when I couldn't identify them, it was an incredible feeling because I'm looking at something that I know that cannot be real,
Hmm.
or something really crazy is going on that my understanding of physics has always told me is impossible. So
Hmm.
I've had those experiences. Yeah. Um, One of the things that's frustrating about having to do a weekly audio show
Hmm.
is it's not practical to go out into the world and personally go to these places I'm talking
Hmm.
about.
Right.
Um, because I would love to.
Hmm.
Every single episode I've done, I say, oh my gosh, I want to spend a year and make a documentary film about this story. And then suddenly, 5 days later, I've had to completely forget that because that's in production now, and I'm now working on this one. I don't
Right.
get to go to these places. I actually got to go to one, um, well, two, after CSICon, where you and I
Hmm.
met. We had our company. We took 50 people to Death Valley,
Oh,
and we
wow.
showed them all the most amazing things in Death Valley, including the famous racetrack playa where the rocks move mysteriously across the ground by themselves. Now, I had been there 2001, I think, is when I first went there, and
Hmm.
I'd been there a number of times since, and I had solved the mystery.
Hmm.
And it didn't get published until 2014, at which point I was planning to publish on it myself. You have to have a weather station set up with some remote communications and sending pictures and stuff. And I had a crowdfunding campaign set up. I had the research permit secured through the Park
Hmm.
Service, and I was just about set to go. And then these guys announced their publication. So, because I knew this 20 years ago. So we racetrack playa, that's one place that I've been many times where you get to see the phenomena
Hmm.
firsthand. Um, and the other one was when I was driving home from that. Um, I was with my son. He's a geologist, and he came on the Death Valley trip to be
Hmm.
our sort of trip geologist. So he and I were driving home together from Nevada to Oregon. And one of the places we'd always wanted to go was this cave in Nevada called Lovelock Cave,
Hmm.
which is way up on a hillside. It's when the area was in some prehistoric giant lake. And the story has always been that not the story, I mean, the science has always said this lake was carved by natural wave action from this giant prehistoric lake, Lake Lahontan, I think it was
Hmm.
called. And since then, since the disappearance of that lake and indigenous people moved in, they had a story that the giant red-haired cannibals lived inside this cave and came out and attacked oh, I'm forgetting what the tribe name was in the area. My apologies to Native Americans. Um, and they had, they cited the particular verbal, what do you call it, the spoken legends, the
Hmm.
oral traditions. That's it. Um, so we get to this cave, and the first thing that we find out is my son's looking at it and he's going, this cave was not carved out by wave action. That is, and he starts pointing out all of these things. It had been a traditional limestone cave because it had cave formations and
Hmm.
everything. And probably what happened is the wave action broke that cave open. So the waves probably did go into that cave, but it was
Hmm.
not created by wave action. So that was a really neat science fact where I'm looking at the whole giant red-haired cannibals part of the story, and he's looking at kind of this basic science fact about the place itself. And we both found things that were wrong. And so last I heard, he was going to go speak to someone in his um, someone back at his alma mater and see if this was worth anyone's master's thesis or something was going and characterizing the true origin of this cave because it's in all of the papers about they're all anthropological papers because they're all
Hmm.
talking about the artifacts and everything that have been found in the cave. But
Amazing.
they all simply say this cave was formed by wave action.
Mhm.
So I don't know how much you care about that, but
No,
that's
I
a
think it's very cool. I think some of the most, I guess, weirdest or bizarre or like just spectacular places to me
Hmm.
are natural, like the natural phenomena that's out there. And
Yeah.
even things just as simple as right before CSICon, I took Michael with me to Sequoia National Park for the first time and
Oh
getting
yeah.
to see those trees. It's it's unreal. I mean, it just feels
Yeah.
so spectacular. Like I feel like I'm dreaming because you're so tiny. And the
I was
giant.
driving through not there, but the coastal redwoods up in
Hmm.
Redwood National Park, I think it is.
Hmm.
Same kind of thing. The trees are enormous. They're the coastal redwoods and not the sequoias, but they're the same, basically the same size. My daughter and I were out walking. It was after dark. We were way out on some trail. It was really foggy, and
Hmm.
we're in just like this ghost wonderland of these enormous trees. The fog was illuminated by the moon, and what happens but an elk starts bugling,
Oh my
and
gosh.
then a couple of them all around. And that's a weird, weird noise if you've never heard an elk bugle before. It was creepy as hell. And I'm going, this is the coolest thing ever.
Oh, that's very cool.
I was glad to get the hell out of there, though.
Yeah. I have to say, every time we film an episode of Weird World, it's like we bring the fog with us. We've had so many. We went to that abandoned, well, it's not really abandoned, but sometimes abandoned, semi-abandoned Wizard of Oz park that's in North Carolina, up in the hills. And it was November, so it was just completely rolled over through fog, and it was beautiful, but also just so bizarre and a little bit eerie as you're like trying to go down the yellow brick road, and it's just like pea soup around you. Like, oh, this is I don't know how I feel
Oh,
about
that's so cool.
this.
I- what was the Miyazaki movie, Spirited Away? You're at the
Yes,
abandoned theme park and you step through the portal or whatever. Did that happen to
yes.
you?
No, thankfully not.
Oh,
Thankfully not.
better luck next time.
I know it would be, I would love to just happen to fall through a portal one day. That would be pretty great.
I know, right? Again, that's another thing. It just never presents itself.
Right. I wish it
What's
did.
the universe thinking about? Give us those portals.
I guess I wanted to ask you too, who some of
Hmm.
your skeptical heroes were. Like, who were
Hmm.
you inspired by when you got involved in the movement?
Well, um, James Randi was the first one that I knew of, even before I knew the word skeptic or anything about that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing him on TV. I'm old enough to have seen him when he was on the Carson show, challenging the psychics and making them fail. And
Hmm.
that was just the greatest entertainment ever. And I loved that so much. And I remember one of my friends in high school said, do you know that guy, James Randi? He's got like a big white beard and he debunks the psychics. And that kind of reminded me and put the name in the back of my head. And then years and years and years later, I came upon a web page or got an email or something advertising James Randi's first amazing meeting, which was at his office in Florida. And Penn and Teller were going to be there, and a couple of other science names that are Penn and Teller aren't science names, but
Hmm.
other science names that I recognized were going to be there. And I asked everyone I knew, does anyone want to go to this with me? And nobody did. And so I didn't go. And that was my
Oh.
experience for like five TAMs, the amazing meeting.
Mm.
They called them TAM. And then finally, my wife and I went to one.
Mhm.
And I met Randy, and I met so many other people. It was just an amazing list of speakers there. I met Christopher Hitchens. I met the guys, the Mythbusters. I met the guys from South Park, Penn and Teller. Um, and I'm delighted to say that I got to know Randy quite well, all the way through to the end of his life. And I did a lengthy dedication to him in one of my podcasts after he passed away. But
Mhm.
yeah, he really got me going. One of our board members uh, says he considers me the intellectual successor to Randy, which
Oh,
to me is such high praise that I do not accept that for an instant. But it's extremely gratifying to know that I was, to some degree anyway, in the same circle of people who knew him well.
what an honor.
Um, he was a really great guy.
Mhm. It's incredible. For this past CSICon where we met you, what was your favorite part or moment? Like what stood out to you the most?
So, um, this is lame, but I've been to so many of these conferences now that I really don't even sit through many of the talks anymore. 'Cause, okay, yeah, I know that. I've heard. Yeah, I get it. But so it's the people. I
Mhm.
spend the whole week hanging out with all of my friends. I met people like you guys.
Mhm.
It was fantastic. Um, and it's like once a year, I get to meet all of my best friends face to face and hang out with for a week. But I would say the big thing, at every conference, there's like the thing that happens. And
Mhm.
there's like, that's the thing you remember about that conference. Sometimes it's some kind of scandal or some kind of something happens. A lot of good stories about that. Uh, well, this one was sort of the war around the gender question. Um,
Mhm.
I guess there's been sort of a maybe 10 years ago, there was a big schism in the skeptic conference community
Mhm.
between people who wanted it to be about atheism and people who wanted it to be about science.
Mhm.
And that kind of tore the community in half. And that was kind of near the end of when the amazing meetings ended.
Mhm.
And the same kind of thing is happening now, where we've got um, sort of what the far right people call wokeness,
Mhm.
infecting skepticism and 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 vice versa. So we had two speakers this year who were on two opposite sides of the sex and gender are absolutely binary, period, and
Mhm.
sex and gender are both on a spectrum in different ways.
Mhm.
And that was kind of the big dramatic fight. Um, Steve Novella, who's the host of Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, he was the one
Mhm.
who gave the talk on they're both on a spectrum and here's how and why. And he's a neurologist.
Mhm.
He's been a very good friend of mine since I started doing this. So at least 15 years, I've known Steve very well.
Mhm.
He's been in two of my movies, in fact.
Oh.
I'm trying to get him to come on our Bermuda Triangle cruise.
Oh, that's very cool. He's Michael's personal hero too.
Oh, and very deserving. He is a fantastic guy. He's a brilliant speaker, a
Mhm.
brilliant thinker, fantastic communicator, and he's a complete dork in real life, which is really fun. One of the most valuable assets that the community has, I think, is Steve.
Mhm. Definitely. So I missed a lot of that, I guess, schism and debate. I think we came in later on Friday because we were filming before we arrived, so we had missed that and only
Good.
heard just echoes about it.
Yeah. It's never any good when there's dramas and things trying to separate the community. It's like some people intentionally pick issues that they know are going to be divisive and controversial to get attention.
Hmm.
And I think that's how this thing got started.
Hmm.
And I think it's unfortunate. There's
Hmm.
there are plenty of other fish to fry that don't divide your audience.
Right. And I
And
think part of it too is that anything that is very personal to people and we become passionate about a topic, it winds up becoming part of our identity. And then people, when it becomes challenged, feel like their identity is being challenged and they take it so
yeah,
personally and it becomes more of a war. It's why politics are just off the table now, right? Because people start to identify themselves as their belief sometimes instead of it being just a topic or an idea. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably how that starts too. And that's why people aren't able to step away from those beliefs and have a conversation with each other about it.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate. And it's one of those cyclical things that society just goes through every so often, and we're going through it now. And
Hmm.
I'm just secure in the knowledge that the pendulum is going to swing back, and we're not going to be in two camps of extremism again. We'll be kind of one happy world again.
It would be
I
very
hope.
lovely to hear. It's funny, completely off topic, but re in relation to what you just said about, coming back and being one happy world, we did a steampunk episode of Weird World Adventures and went kind of to the Science Museum, and they had this whole steampunk exhibit going on. And they had some of the very early stages of people that kind of inspired that movement. And apparently, and I think it was 1929, H.G. Wells had actually predicted the internet before obviously it was ever a thing, because he just believed that there would be this source of knowledge that everyone could come together and access. And he really kind of predicted it and believed that this would bring the world together. Like he believed that having something like the internet would bring world peace. And it's funny how that didn't turn out that way. But it was like the early predictions of something like that. People thought
Interesting.
that it would, bring people together, and they had such a positive viewpoint about what it could do.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the rising tide raises all boats equally, right?
Hmm.
It does make it easier to connect with. I've got friends on the other side of the world that I would never have
Hmm.
spoken with otherwise if it wasn't for the internet. And it's so easy to get, hey, here's a handheld device with immediate access to the sum of all human knowledge. Okay, that's incredible. But it also provides a pathway for everything else to spread, including
Hmm.
misinformation and hate and everything else.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's great and it's not great simultaneously.
Definitely. I feel like people would have to be flawless and just completely positive and kind for that to kind of bring forth that world peace as well.
You mean they're not?
Right? What?
People aren't flawless?
So we talked a little bit too at CSICon about your UFO movie. Would you like to tell us about that and some of the projects you're working on now?
Yeah. So I mentioned that we try to always have a documentary film in production.
Hmm.
Um, our goal is one a year. That's a pretty lofty goal, so we don't quite keep up with it. But we released one in 2022 and 2023. Um, didn't make it for 2024.
Hmm.
So the UFO movie was our 2023 film. And we didn't know what we wanted to make a film about. It's we want to teach. We're an educational nonprofit. We're not profit driven. We are mission driven. So we don't care if the movie makes any money. We just care that a lot of people watch it.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, those have to go hand in hand.
Hmm.
No one's going to watch it if someone isn't making money off of it and promoting it and putting it at the top of the algorithm.
Right.
So you still have to make something that's going to be really popular.
Hmm.
So our question is, okay, what Trojan horse do we come up with to insert our message of the value of critical thinking and scientific skepticism? And at the end of 2022, what was everyone talking about? Well, the same thing they are now is the UFO hearings in conference, in
Hmm.
Congress, and all of the Navy videos, and UFO this and UFO that, and every other frickin' show on TV is about UFOs. So, okay, we're going to make a movie about UFOs. Well, that means we're going to teach astrophysics and astrobiology using the public interest in UFOs as a springboard.
Hmm.
So that's basically what the film is. Um, being a science writer, I'm fortunate to have friends and contacts in all around the world in every imaginable science and every imaginable field. So it was very easy to put together a great panel of experts who appeared in the film in interviews on all of the subjects we wanted to talk on. The funny thing about the film is the title, the UFO movie they don't want you to see. So we had like 15 or 20 titles. And we had them all on a list, and we're putting out all these surveys and we're workshopping all these titles. What do we want to call it? And someone added that as a joke. Because, there's all these conspiracy theory movies, what doctors don't want you to know and all this stuff.
Right.
So Someone added that as a joke, and it was the far and away the most popular title that everyone liked. And I said, come on, we can't actually call it that because that's going to make people think it's a conspiracy theory film. And people started saying things like, yeah, but that's the title we're all talking about.
Hmm.
And that's the title we're all remembering. And I start going, you know, those are things you can't buy.
Hmm.
Just a title that people want to talk about,
Right.
that's pretty darn valuable. So we went ahead and called it that. And it's funny because for a while it was on YouTube it's now on YouTube Movies and TV.
Hmm.
I don't even know how you watch that, but for a while anyway, it was just on a regular YouTube page.
Hmm.
And so we had thousands and thousands of comments to read. And a lot of people were saying things like, hey, this was a bait and switch, you know? You promised to reveal the truth about UFOs, and instead you gave us all this science. Various comments like that, many more less complimentary than that. So um, it's been a really good success, and I'm super proud of it. I think it's the best work I've ever done. I had a lot of fun making it. I wish we'd poured more money into the production, but most people don't seem to have a problem with the production value. Um, I almost got, uh, well, I did get hypothermia, and I almost died, and that was very dramatic and interesting. That was
Oh my
that was
gosh.
that was the best story to come out of the production. I got to go to Jimmy Carter's house in Plains, Georgia, and hang out with. I got to meet his wife. He was too unwell to come out.
Hmm.
Um, it was just a well, you do TV production. You have extraordinary experiences doing it.
Hmm.
And, I mean, I love that, and I think back on the experiences making the film more than I remember the film itself.
Hmm.
But I'm very pleased that it's met with such great success. My ultimate goal for success for that film was if the SETI Institute would feature it on their monthly movie night, and they did.
That's
So that was
amazing.
that. I think that was October last year, maybe.
Congratulations.
No, thank you. That was
You're
that
welcome.
was absolutely amazing. And Seth Shostak, the senior astronomer there at the SETI Institute, he and I did a 90-minute Q&A, and then when that was over, he stayed on for another 2 hours, and we did Q&A. We
Wow.
had a Zoom with 400 people in the Q&A after the 90 minutes. I've never
Wow.
seen that size of an audience before. It was amazing. I didn't know Zoom could support that. Apparently they did.
That's
Fantastic.
incredible.
Yeah, I was so incredibly gratified by that.
Those weird stories too that I guess I brought up, like what's the weird things that happen? It's always those, like almost dying from hypothermia, things like that. Our world is so catered for our comfort. So we're so, just we expect things to just go a certain way. We plan things out. And it's whenever things don't go as planned and they go off and something, happens that was unexpected. That's always the greatest story that you can have. Or just to me, those are like great experiences.
Let me give you another one. Our 2017 film, Principles of
Hmm.
Curiosity, which was a 40-minute classroom length film. It wasn't a feature film.
Hmm.
Um, we shot a lot of that at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville, Alabama.
Hmm.
And we had our producer found some gigantic Airbnb house, and the entire crew stayed in this one house. I
Hmm.
don't know, we had 10 or 12 people. And it was it was a historic home. It had one of the signs in front of it saying, historical landmark, blah blah blah. I don't remember what the story was with it. It's just a very old house. And in the kitchen, which had been, added like 50 years after the house had been built because they didn't have kitchens in the old days,
Hmm.
there was like a storeroom beyond the kitchen. And in that storeroom, there was what looked like uh, you have on the outside of some houses, there will be a big hatch you can lift up to go down into the cellar from
Yes.
outside the house. But that was inside the storeroom.
Oh.
So you'd like lift that up and you'd go down into some cellar. And it was locked. Like that was the owner's place. We weren't allowed to go in there. And we'd tried to, and we're all drunk and it's 2 in the morning. We're having fun exploring this weird old house. And um, several times, what came from underneath that door was like someone was banging on it, like very angrily, stop the noise. And there was no other outlets. That room didn't have any other ways out,
Hmm.
and it was locked. And I don't know if none of us, at least nobody that will admit it to me, knows if that pounding was actually coming, someone was pounding that door from underneath, or if it was someone in the house playing some trick on the rest of us. I don't know, but I didn't see any way that it could. And I just kind of left that in my mind as one of those little mysteries that I'm never going to find out what happened. But that is what I think about when I think about that film, is that experience of,
That's
I mean, first, how much
wild.
fun we all had as a crew, but just second, that particular little episode.
Hmm. That's incredible. It that's the kind of stuff that I love as an Explorers Club member, right? It's always
Hmm.
trying to explore, and we did that too. I studied in Serbia during college at a political theater for a semester, and then we spent, I think, a month in England in a castle, like this old castle that was just like
Oh,
privately owned by a family. And we had like accidentally moved back the carpet, and then there was like a hatch under the carpet, and you have to go down in the hatch under the carpet. I mean, why would
yeah.
you not, right? So then we're going down. I don't even think I put my shoes on because we started inside. And then, you're going and there's just this basement of all these treasures and things from the 1600s, 1700s, old almanacs. I mean, I was in heaven. And then it connected to the church next door because it was like that catacomb underneath. So then we're in the catacombs connecting to the church, and then we find a way out into the yard, and we're in the cemetery of the church. It's like you couldn't write a better horror story. And I'm like, well, I guess these are the moments that I live for because how
No
did this
way.
just happen?
That is so cool.
How did this happen? Oh,
We did
very.
we did a thing. We were shooting some TV pilot, and we were on board the Queen Mary in Long
Oh
Beach,
yeah.
California. And um, we had a team of local ghost hunters, some people who
Hmm.
actually marketed their services as ghost hunters. And we had them with us, and we were following them through the ship and everything. And they were telling us who were the famous ghosts and how do we contact them and where would we find them down in the engine room and all of this stuff. And there was this weird little room inside the engine rooms are these great huge spaces, right? Very tall
Hmm.
ceilings. And there was this weird room that was just four walls. It didn't have a roof because I don't know. And so they go into this room, they open the door, and they're in there with all of their sensors and their little magnet detectors and everything. And they're talking to the spirit of the captain or whoever it was. And our director, he took a quarter and he flicked it up in the air so that it fell down into that room and landed on the floor. Now, first of all, I want to stress that that was deceptive and we did not use any of that footage. So I do not believe in being deceptive, no matter what your goal is.
Hmm.
Um, but it was pretty darn funny because it never occurred to them that it might have been a member of the crew throwing a quarter. They were looking at the date on the quarter. They were, was it from 1930? And um, they were taking all these pictures and readings and everything. And it's like, oh my God.
Oh my gosh.
That's the story that they tell now
Right,
when
yes.
they're on a podcast like this one.
A ghost threw a quarter at me.
We were actually attacked by a ghost. We threw quarters at.
Oh, that's very funny. Well, I guess before we call it here, I wanted to ask if there's anything else that you would like to, I guess, say to anyone about the skeptic community and about anyone that's kind of curious into getting more involved in kind of developing that kind of skeptical mindset.
Yeah, one of the things is that it's unfortunate that it sounds like CSICon, the current annual conference, is not going to continue.
Hmm.
I understand they're not going to have one in 2025, and the 2026 one is going to be at their office in Buffalo, New York,
Hmm.
which great, and I'll go, but it's not going to be the same as having 1,000 people at a
Hmm.
giant conference center in Las Vegas every year.
Right.
So there's going to be kind of a hole for people to hook up with all of their best friends that you see once a year.
Hmm.
Um, we're having at Skeptoid Media, we're putting on these live, we call them adventures, Skeptoid adventures. We had the one in Death Valley that I mentioned. We're going to the Bermuda Triangle in April, but those are something that, a few dozen people can go on. It's not, I mean, one of the amazing meetings had 1,800 people. I think that was
Wow.
the max. It was just an enormous audience. So there's a need.
Hmm.
There's definitely a need for um, people to come together over something. When you can't do that, the things you can do is listen to the podcasts and share the podcast with your friends, kind of the basic stuff like that.
Hmm.
There's a movement right now called well, it's not new or anything. It's called Skepticamp.
Hmm.
And a Skepticamp is just a free weekend long conference where all of the organizers are also the presenters and no money changes hands or anything. You
Hmm.
find a room, someone has access to a room at their office or at a library or something, and you just kind of put together a little mini weekend long informal skeptic camp, and everyone makes presentations. I went to one in New Mexico, was the last one I went to a few months back, that turned out to be just absolutely extraordinary.
Hmm.
Some of the presenters were people I hadn't even known happened to live in Albuquerque. Um, they were people that I had heard of and had wanted to meet, and my gosh, here they are. So it was a small group. There's like 15 people there, but I made new lifelong friends and met people I'd always wanted to meet, and some of whom I've collaborated with since. And it's been fantastic. So um, there's not even a website for
Oh
Skepticamp.
no.
It's the kind of thing you just kind of have to plan. So there's a giant gaping hole right now, and we're doing some other things to try and address that I won't mention right now that
Hmm.
may or may not come to fruition. But it's tough because it's so important, and the reason that there's a hole is because what we do is the opposite of what's commercially successful.
Hmm.
What's commercially successful is to say ghosts and UFOs are real and
Hmm.
aliens are visiting. And when you say, no, here's why we know that's not true and how cool that is, that's not the sensational version of the story and it's not commercially successful.
Right.
That is the eternal problem in this community. Is
Hmm.
finding a way to make it commercially successful without depending on people's charity.
Hmm.
We're a nonprofit. We literally depend on people's charity. And that's not a business model that other people could follow.
Right.
So that's why we make our films because they we reach a larger audience and hopefully
Hmm.
they get you know get some excitement around the idea of scientific skepticism, as I hope
Fantastic.
season 2 of your show will do.
Yes, definitely. I have to say, you bringing that up too. We were in development for a long time with the Travel Channel when it was right before it was WB bought Discovery, and it was pushed much more into the paranormal from what it started at because that's just how things work. And you know, it's funny because the entire Travel Channel now is just paranormal. It's not even travel anymore. And one of the notes we had in the development for the show, because it was very adventure and, the Explorers Club kind of side of things, and they said it's too travel-loggy for
You're
the
the
Travel
Travel
Channel.
Channel, literally.
And I was like, I'm sorry, what? But it's the Travel Channel.
You know,
So there
one
is
of go
there
ahead,
is
finish
the
that.
freedom now for season two that comes with us having our platform on Amazon to have our own voice and to make it more of
Yeah,
an identity, which we're excited to do.
the democratization of content has been very liberating.
Hmm.
Uh, but the majors and the studios are really trying to crack down on that. You
Hmm.
can't make money with an independent film anymore.
Hmm.
Um, some of the distributors are saying, "Hey, honest advice, upload it to YouTube.
Hmm.
A few hundred, few $1,000s you might make from that, or more than you're going to get if we just put this out onto all the streaming services."
Hmm.
It's and like streaming services like Tubi that are ad supported,
Hmm.
and Amazon Freevee, is that it? The Amazon
Yes.
version? The studios have taken their back catalogs of 100 years of Hollywood films and dumped them into that.
Hmm.
So if someone searches to try and find my film, it's going to be number 55 on the list below all these other films.
Right.
It's they're being successful at kind of taking that control back.
Hmm.
Um, one of the important lessons that I learned back in 2008, this the thing we were talking about on the Queen Mary with the ghost in the
Hmm.
corner. That was a pilot we were shooting. Um, and in one of our meetings with I don't remember what network it was, and our agent had set this up. We had really great success with the road trip. We had a great agent. We had great meetings at so many networks. And well, we didn't get a deal. But other than that, we had a really great success. One of the meetings, the network executive said, well, the concept of the show is called The Skeptologists.
Hmm.
There's some pseudoscience going on somewhere. The bat signal goes up. The science experts jump in the Batmobile and race to the scene of the pseudoscience to debunk it, right? That was the concept. It was kind of like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy meets Mythbusters. I think that was how we pitched it.
I love it.
And one of the one of the network guys said, but you're going to have the paranormal explanation turn out to be the true one some of the time, right? And we're all, fuck no. That's you've misunderstood the reason. Well, our reasons for making a show are not the same as their reasons for
Mhm.
broadcasting a show.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental problem that we all face.
Hmm.
And that's why conferences are drying up, and it's why it's hard to get this content out there.
Hmm.
The tide is against us for sure.
Definitely. Hmm.
I will leave it on that depressing note.
Oh boy. Well, hopefully, I feel like we are scrappy and we always find a way. So
We do.
hopefully
I
it'll
mean,
rise again.
yeah. I mean, you're doing a great show. I love the movies we're putting out. I think we're doing great work. And there's a lot of great skeptical podcasts out there.
Mhm.
And
Definitely.
there will be continue to be more new ones. And you've got new creators popping up who are making new fantastic content. And that's going to be harder for the studios to take away is the online streaming content.
Hmm.
That's where you truly can be the cream and rise to the top.
Hmm.
So that's what we're going.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Brian.
Thank you for having me. This is a lot of fun. Great to see you again after the conference. That was a few months ago now, wasn't it? Like
No,
two
isn't
months,
that
3 months.
crazy? I feel like it just happened.
Time flies. I know it was so much fun.
I was. Well, thank you so much again. It was wonderful seeing you. And until next
You
time,
too.
everybody, stay weird.
And stay skeptical.